Hi, I'm Dr. John Neufeld with Back to the Bible Canada, and I want to thank you for joining me today. We're taking this time to take a journey to the cross, just week after week, following Jesus' last week of passion in which he suffered for us, died for our sins, rose from the dead. And we're revisiting what the four gospel writers, the eyewitness accounts, tell us about what happened to Jesus during that week. And today, we're going to look at what happened to Jesus on Thursday night, which is such an important night. It is a time when the passion of Jesus reaches this exquisite part in which we find ourselves overwhelmed with what Jesus went through on our behalf. So let me start by telling you about a man by the name of Frank Reed. Now, Frank Reed was held hostage in a terrorist cell in Lebanon for 4 years. That's a number of years ago already, but the time when he was held hostage was well known, well remembered by people that lived through that. For months at a time, Reed was blindfolded for months in a complete dark cell, all by himself, chained to a wall, and kept in complete silence. On one occasion, he was moved to another room, and although he was still blindfolded, he could sense there were others in the room. He said, "You can't even begin to imagine how that felt for me." Weeks later, he discovered that the people he was in a cell with, in a very similar situation to his own, were a man by the name of Terry Anderson, and another man named Tom Sutherland. So let's get back to Frank Reed. Frank Reed was beaten, he was made ill, he was tormented, and all of those things were bad enough, but he says the thing that was the worst for him, that more than anything else, the greatest torment, was the feeling that not a soul in the world cared for you. So in other words, he was completely isolated and made to feel alone. He said there is nothing like that. So when we talk about Jesus at Gethsemane, which is what I'm going to talk about today, it is that word alone that I want to have us to really focus in on. I want us to see Jesus slowly, gradually, everyone around him is being peeled away from him until he stands there all by himself and he's left alone. I think about a hymn that was written, it's back in 1914, it was written by a man named Ben Price, and he captured the mood of Matthew 26, which is this entire Gethsemane phenomenon. And here's what the hymn sounded like. I won't sing it, but I'm just going to read the words. It was alone my Savior prayed in dark Gethsemane. Alone he drained the bitter cup and suffered there for me. Alone, alone, he bore it all alone. He gave himself to save his own. He suffered, bled, and died alone. So you can hear alone just gets repeated over and over in that hymn. So you get the sense that you can't understand what Jesus went through until you see him isolated from everyone else, when there's no one else to talk to. Of course, he's talking to his Father, but eventually, when he gets to the cross, he's even going to say, my God, why have you forsaken me?" So we see Jesus now completely left destitute. Please keep that image in mind. You don't understand Jesus in this point in his life until you see him from precisely that perspective. Well, let me get back to, so that we can get our minds into this. Jesus has been on Thursday evening up in the upper room. He's been celebrating Passover together with his disciples. And in John's Gospel, John 13 to 17, those 5 chapters are taken up in that one experience of Jesus teaching his disciples in the upper room. So that now has come to a close. The Passover meal is over. All the instructions that he's been given them is over. Judas has gone out into the night. He never was a part of all those Passover instructions. He's gone by then. He's seeking to betray Jesus. One of the 12 is already gone. So Jesus, you can see, slowly being isolated. And so he's left with the 11. And he now tells them it's time for us to go. They leave the upper room. They would have gone down into the Kidron Valley. And you might remember that I had said that because of the amount of lambs that were being slaughtered at the Passover celebration, that there was a drainage pipe that ran down into the Kidron Valley. So if you can imagine Jesus going down from Jerusalem, crossing the Kidron Valley in the night, By the time he gets to the other side, you would have expected that the bottom of his robe is now stained with blood. And that's an important image for us to carry in mind. So you've got Jesus now who is walking with the 11. They've crossed the Kidron Valley. They're crossing what is now the Valley of Blood. His sandals and the bottom of his hem is stained with blood as they walk up to the other side. And on the other side, they come to the garden, which is called the Garden of Gethsemane. He's going to stop there and he's going to pray with his disciples. And there in Gethsemane, the word Gethsemane is actually a word that means the olive press. So you would have expected it's not just an olive grove, but it also has a press there, which is used to, crush the olives to make the oil that was used in a number of different places. And it's fascinating because the place where Jesus was going to begin to feel himself being crushed for our sins was in the place where crushing happened on a regular basis. So you can see all of the symbolism around Jesus. One has already left. Eventually they will all run away. And so he is now going to this place where he is going to be crushed. So keep those things in mind. Well, as he's gone there to pray, and as you also will remember that by the time he is in the depths of his praying, drops of blood are falling from his forehead onto the ground because of the great stress that he is under. Matthew records that as they are going up to Gethsemane, so they're on the other side of the Kidron Valley, they're going up the Mount of Olives to that garden that was there, that Jesus then says, "You will all fall away because of me this night. Every one of you, you'll all fall away." So he recognizes he's going to be alone. Now, they can't hear that. I mean, they're not listening to that. They can't imagine that. They feel themselves so connected to Jesus, they would never leave him alone. And yet here he is telling them that they're going to be alone. So, Judas has already gone out. Jesus has been talking about his suffering. The night is turning into what many of them would have thought to be something they would never have anticipated. And in the middle of the Passover meal, Jesus has been holding up bread and saying, "This is my body broken for you." And then he holds the cup, "This is my blood shed for you." So the image of Jesus dying is there. One has already left them. Now they're being told they're all going to run away. What's happening? Could this night even have gotten any worse? And that's the question that we need to ask. So then Jesus doesn't end there. With Judas, he just simply said, "Whatever you do, go do quickly." So you go ahead and do it. And Judas goes out into the night. But when he tells his disciples, "You're all going to run away on account of me," he says, he's quick to add something. He says, "But after I am raised up, I will go before you into Galilee." Now it might be that they're going to become frightened and lose their courage, and it might be that they will turn out to be disloyal to him. But he's telling them right now, "I will not be disloyal to you. I will still care for you, and I will still gather you up again." And I don't know. I read at this point in time in the story of the Passion of Jesus, and I find myself overwhelmed that here is a Jesus who cares for those who are erring and wandering and who don't have the conviction to do what they said that they would always do. And so I take that to heart. I think about, maybe you should as well, about the days in your life when you've not been as passionate and committed to Jesus as you ought to, and maybe you feel that you have betrayed Jesus, but hear me on this. He will never betray you. He will never desert you. He will never be disloyal to you. He will call you back to himself. That's the image that we find here. Well, so the disciples, they hear that they're all going to run away on account of him, and that they're all going to be weak. But at this point in time, Peter steps forward, and Peter said to him, and listen to this, "Even if I must die with you, I will not deny you." And all the disciples said the same. So the 11 that are remaining, "Yeah, I'm with Peter, and not a chance, Jesus. We will not do this. Regardless of the difficulty that you go through now, we'll be there with you every single step of the way. You won't be alone. We won't abandon you." And then Luke records Jesus, he confronts Peter at this point in time, and he explains how difficult matters have become. And Peter doesn't know it. So here's what Jesus says. Simon, he says, Satan demanded to have you, that he might sift you like wheat. But I have prayed for you that your faith might not fail. In other words, it's come to that. You're about to enter into a spiritual warfare that you know nothing of. And standing there is Satan, who demands to have you. He wasn't satisfied with just Judas. He wants you specifically because you've been the leader of this group, and he's going to take you down. But I've been praying. I've been entering into the spiritual warfare on your behalf. You don't know the precarious place that you're in right now. And, Peter should have listened to that, I think. And he should have drunk those words in. He should have said, thank you. Please don't stop praying for me. I didn't know that I'm at this place of weakness, but you must know these things. So please don't give up on me. I think that would have been the right thing for Peter to say, but he doesn't. And Mark records Peter saying this, even if they, and he's pointing to the other 10 that are standing there, and I imagine him, maybe pointing or looking at them, even if they all fall away, I will not fall away. And see, here's how I understand Peter's response. I think it's a twofold response. And the first thing that he does is he says, Jesus, you've underestimated me. That's the first thing he wants to say. You don't understand my true character. You think I'm weaker than I actually am. But I know myself better than you know me, which is quite a thing to say, you see. That's the first thing that he does. And the second thing that he does is, Jesus, you probably got the others right. They will fall away. In other words, he's ready to throw the rest of them under the bus right then and there. It's a horrible response of Peter. And then Jesus, of course, says to him, listen, Peter, I'm going to tell you that before the rooster crows in the morning, you will have already denied that you know me 3 times. This night will not be over. The morning will not have dawned, and already on this night, not once, not twice, 3 times, you'll deny any knowledge of me. You will run from me, Peter. That's what's going to happen to you this night. Now, there's something else I need to bring to our attention here as we think about this stuff. If you read John's gospel, it speaks about Peter's denial while they're still in the upper room. But if you read Matthew and if you read Mark, he seems to indicate that he said these things while they're on the way up to the Garden of Gethsemane. So what's the answer to that? And I think the answer is that I think this event actually happened twice. It got replayed a second time. You will deny me. I will never deny you. And then later, you will deny me. I'll never deny you. In other words, they replayed the same scenario. Jesus is adamant, but Peter's just as adamant. That's what's going to happen. And so they come to the place called Gethsemane. They come to the garden. And Jesus tells 8 of them that they are going to remain some distance away. And he's going to take 3 of them with him, Peter, James, and John. So now you can see already he's put 8 at a distance. He's already more alone, and he's only surrounded by these 3. And until that very moment, he has had a very calm front, but now he begins to be in deep anguish. And I wonder what those 3 were thinking. And it's building. And Jesus confides with them this truth. He says, my soul is very sorrowful even unto death. And as we know, in just a little while, then he would begin to pray with such intensity that the blood vessels in his forehead would burst, and the blood would congeal in the night air, and it would fall like great clumps onto the ground. That was the nature of the praying. And then, of course, he prays those 3 times. The load is so heavy. Father, if it be possible, let this cup pass from me. Now, I'm going to consider that in a little while, but for now, let's just concentrate on that one thing. He's praying with such intensity here. Now, I'm going to have a step back from this and just consider the intensity of Jesus praying by contrasting Jesus with Socrates. And if you know something about the death of Socrates, it's a fascinating story. It's a true story. Socrates had been wrongly convicted of subverting the youth of Athens, and he had been condemned to death. And as part of the death sentence, they called him to drink a cup of deadly hemlock. Hemlock was a poison, so the condemned prisoner is supposed to call, and at an appropriate moment, he's allowed to be with his friends, and then he's to drink the hemlock. And it's Socrates' student, Plato, another philosopher that we know very well, that recorded those events, and we have them actually in our record. So let me read to you from Plato's account about the death of Socrates. Plato writes, when Crito was another one of the students of Socrates, when Crito heard, he signaled to the slave who was standing by. And the boy went out and returned after a few moments with the man who was to administer the poison, which he brought ready, already mixed in the cup. And when Socrates saw him, he said, now, good sir, you understand these things. What must I do? Just drink it and walk around until your legs begin to feel heavy, then lie down. It will soon act. And with that, he offered Socrates the cup. The latter took it quite cheerfully, it says, without a tremor, with no change of color or expression. He just gave the man his stolid look and asked, how say you? Is it permissible to pledge this drink to someone? May I? And the answer came, we allow reasonable time in which to drink it. I understand, he said. We can and must pray to the gods that our sojourn on earth will continue happy beyond the grave. This is my prayer, and may it come to pass. And with these words, he stoically drank the potion quite readily and cheerfully. And with that, Socrates died. And what I want to do is just think about that. On the one hand, you have Socrates, who is condemned unrighteously to death by individuals who sought to do him harm. Jesus, who was unrighteously condemned to death also by individuals who sought his harm. Socrates is given a cup to drink, and Jesus on that night prays, take this cup from me. Socrates takes the cup cheerfully. Jesus takes the cup as his blood vessels are breaking, and he's praying with such intensity and saying, Father, if it be possible, take this cup from me. Socrates is cheerful. Jesus is in great agony of soul. See, I want to contrast those two pictures and ask, why is that? Why is Socrates able to accept death so easily, and Jesus went forward with such agony? What's the explanation of that? And here it's very important to ask this question, because it was Martin Luther who commented on this, and he said, never has any man feared death more than Jesus. Let me say it again. Never has any man feared death more than Jesus. So why is that? Why is Jesus so fearful and Socrates is not? Why does he pray, let this cup pass from me? Well, we need to stop for a moment and ask, what exactly is the cup that's being offered to Jesus? I mean, Socrates got a cup of deadly hemlock poison, which apparently would make your death quite an easy death. And Jesus is given something very different. So let's stop for a moment and ask, when Jesus prayed, let this cup pass from me, what cup is he talking about? And the image of a cup is found many times in the First Testament. And I want us to look at three passages where that image is found. And the first one is in Isaiah. And there we find that God is about to punish Jerusalem. And here's what the passage says. I'm reading Isaiah 51:17, if you want to know the reference. Wake yourself, stand up, O Jerusalem, you who have drank from the hand of the Lord the cup of his wrath, who have drunk it to the dregs, the bowl, the cup of staggering. That's an interesting image. In other words, I'm about to punish this, and here, take the cup. This cup is the cup of my wrath. I'm going to make Jerusalem drink it, and she will suffer. That's found in Isaiah 51:17. Now here's another passage, this one from Jeremiah, who actually saw Jerusalem destroyed. In Jeremiah 25:15 and 16, Jeremiah is here pronouncing judgment not on Jerusalem, but on the nations who were opposed to Jerusalem. And here's what Jeremiah says to the nations around them. Thus the Lord, the God of Israel, said to me, take from my hand this cup of the wine of wrath, and make all the nations to whom I send you drink it. They will drink and stagger and be crazed because of the sword that I am sending among them. In other words, they're going to drink this cup from my hand. It's going to drive them insane. It's going to be miserable. the intensity of suffering that comes from drinking this cup is going to be more than they can bear. Wow. Finally, the last image is from the book of Ezekiel. And as you know, Ezekiel was there he wasn't there, he was in captivity already, but when the final destruction of Jerusalem happened, Ezekiel makes this statement that Judah is going to be punished in the same way that Israel was punished. And I'm reading here Ezekiel 23, 31, 34. It says, "You have gone the way of your sister, therefore I will give her cup into your hand. Thus says the Lord. You shall drink your sister's cup that is deep and large. You shall be laughed at and held in derision, for it contains much," he says. "You will be filled with drunkenness and sorrow, a cup of horror and desolation, the cup of your sister Samaria. You shall drink it and drain it out, and gnaw its shards, and tear your breasts, for I have spoken, declares the Lord God." So you can see that every time that the cup is mentioned, it comes as a precursor to greater suffering than can ever have been imagined. So let's get back to Jesus, who is now praying, and he's saying, "I too have received this cup from the hand of God." So I wrote the words out, and I'd like to read them to you. It says, "The cup is a cup filled with the horror, the wrath, and the desolation of God. God the Father was not handing his Son a cup of hemlock and allowing him to enter peacefully into his presence. Instead, he was handing his Son a cup of the full fury of the wrath of a righteous, incensed, and angry God for the sins of the human race. And he said to his Son, 'You must drink it.'" And as Jesus looked into that cup, I can only imagine that his face is filled with horror. His entire body is convulsed. He's overwhelmed at the mere thought of bringing that cup up to his lips. Please remember that Jesus is not only fully God, but he's fully man at the same time. And as fully man, he experienced any kind of these experiences as you and I would, although I have nothing to compare the sufferings of Jesus with. Absolutely nothing. And so as Jesus begins to pray, we know that his disciples are already exhausted and they've fallen asleep. He is now all alone. Everyone is asleep. The spiritual warfare is intense. And as he's praying, he prays, "Father, if it is at all possible, let this cup pass from me." He's not saying, I just don't want to suffer on the cross. He's actually saying, I don't want to live under your displeasure and wrath, for it's more than I can bear. But he also says, "Nevertheless, not what I will, but what you will." In other words, Father, if there is no other way to be glorified and to show mercy to a broken human race other than this, then as you will, this I will do in obedience to your will. And of course, we know that Jesus then drinks. I have a memory in ministry, and maybe a number of memories in ministry, when sometimes, Christian ministry, and it's not just pastors, but it's, missionaries I've talked to have felt the same thing. Other people involved in, Christian work who are serving, in some area that really requires a great deal of energy and requires, a great deal of outlay. Sometimes they become the subject of unjust criticism, and sometimes it's even just criticism. And, but people begin to, make comments, and rumors spread, and people misunderstand what you think you're doing and so forth. And you begin to feel the burden of people rejecting you, and you feel all alone. And at the same time, as a pastor, you can get that feeling, yet I'm supposed to still care for the needs of people, but it feels like I have no energy left to do that because I'm so busy now wrapped up in my own sufferings that I don't know who I can give myself to. But here's the unique thing about Jesus. He is caring for his disciples at the same time as he is about to drink the cup of the Father's wrath. He is doing all of this at the same time. And I say again, it's hard for me to wrap my head around the intensity of what Jesus was experiencing at that moment in time. Well, the agony of Jesus' prayers are now broken because Jesus now quickly goes to the disciples and wakes them, and he says, "The hour is at hand. The hour is at hand. And everybody were rubbing the sleep from their eyes. What's he talking about? And at that very moment, Judas arrives. Judas with a whole group of people behind him. He's accompanied by the priests. He's accompanied by the temple guard, by the cohort of Roman soldiers. Now, a cohort of Roman soldiers, it's hard to say. A lot of people say that, on the battlefield, a cohort was always 600. But sometimes when you do a civilian arrest, as this was required, maybe it was only 200 soldiers. So, it's hard to say how many soldiers, but let's say at the very least, you have 200 Roman soldiers, you have the temple guard that's there, and you have the chief priest. So this is a large crowd of hundreds of people. They're descending on, Jesus' location. I have to believe that at this point in time, they've gone to Judas and they've said, look, we have to kill Jesus now. Because the crowd is, far too passionate about him. He's going to rip all of Israel apart. We've got to stop him. We thought we'd kill him after Passover. He's taken that out of our hands. We're going to have to kill him now. But we're going to have to arrest him, and we're going to have to do it in the night when nobody's watching. So they got Judas to betray him. So no doubt Judas went out and found them and brought them back to the upper room. And, by that time, it was empty. So where is he now? So they're asking Judas, and no doubt Jesus would have taken his disciples up onto Gethsemane to pray in the past. So he said, look, this would have been one of his places. Let's go there. So, got hundreds of people, armed men. They're descending on it. They're expecting a fight at the last moment, and they're wanting to bring such overwhelming force that they, devastate them. And if they have to, they're going to kill all the disciples at one fell swoop. But there he is with all of them. They got to know which is him. So Judas is the one. We've all heard the idea of having a Judas kiss. It's the ultimate betrayal. And Judas breaks through into the camp where Jesus has been waking his disciples, kisses Jesus, and Jesus says, would you betray the Son of Man with a kiss? And then Jesus, knowing that everything was about to happen, that all of this was according to the foreordained plan of God, he steps forward towards that, crowd of, priests and soldiers and everyone else and says, what do you want? Whom do you seek? And they said, we seek Jesus of Nazareth. And in the dark, they don't know it's him. And he simply says, I am he. And here's the gospel writers say that when he first says, I am he, that a group of people standing in the front, they just fell back. There was something of the power of his announcement, I am he, that caused a number of them to fall back. And I have this sense here that Jesus could well have used all of his authority to devastate that group of soldiers with but one word. And it's fascinating also because when he says, I am he, that's in the English translation. The Greek, out of which it comes, simply has the words ego eimi. And ego eimi can also be translated as I am. And what's fascinating about that is that we know that there are a number of times when Jesus uses the word I am. At one point in time, it's found in John chapter 8. Jesus is arguing with the Pharisees, and they say, just who do you think you are? And Jesus says, before Abraham was, I am. He says, I am the one true eternal God. We also know, if you read through the Gospel of John, there are 7 times where Jesus uses these separate I am statements. I am the bread of life. I am the light of the world. I am the door to the sheep. I am the resurrection and the life, and so forth. I am. That is, when Jesus says I am, he's declaring his true essence, who he actually is. I am. So he stands there before them. Who are you seeking? Jesus of Nazareth. I am. And then with those words, I am, they fall back because of the authority of the one who speaks. But his first action after that is not to take advantage and press his authority and drive all of them away. His very first step is, I am the one you're seeking. So if you seek me, let these men go. See, Jesus is giving himself up immediately, and he does so in order to also to protect his disciples. Again, in the midst of his agony, he's asking himself how they're doing. Will they be okay? Now, Peter didn't get that. In fact, Peter then, in his intensity to prove that he will not forsake Jesus, draws out a sword, and we know that he, clips off a guy's ear, and Jesus heals the guy on the spot. Peter almost, I would say, he probably almost ruined the whole thing to have all of the disciples killed, but Jesus took advantage of that situation to provide even healing for the men that were seeking to arrest and to kill him. In fact, the words that Jesus says here right at the end are simply this: shall I not drink the cup that the Father has given me? Shall I not do it? In other words, don't pull out your sword to defend me. I have been called to this very hour. Some time ago, I was in Jerusalem. We were at Gethsemane, and I was in a conversation with our Jewish guide, not a Christian man, but a man was very thoughtful. And I remember he said to me, can we talk about the sufferings of Jesus? He said, I don't understand. There have been people that have suffered all sorts of things, some debilitating illnesses that go for a lifetime, and there are other people that have been executed in just as a cruel manner as Jesus. I don't understand. And he said, I'm not trying to be disrespectful, but I don't understand why you make so much of the sufferings of Jesus. I thought it was a very insightful question, and it gave us an opportunity to talk about that. And we talked about this: suffering the displeasure of the Father, bearing up for the sins of the whole world, our sin bearer going forward. He, our Passover lamb, that is slaughtered for us so that the sins of the whole human race would fall upon him, and he would suffer and die for what he had not done, and that the innocent one would be condemned so that the guilty ones might be released. There was never been suffering like this suffering. Indeed, the intensity of this moment was greater than any that any human being had ever experienced. So the journey to the cross is going to end in triumph, it's true. But these things are necessary so that hour after hour later, as Jesus will be hanging on the cross, he will be suffering the weight of the Father's wrath. This is the cup that he drank at Gethsemane. And it's there in Gethsemane that we see the passion that Jesus has for the glory of God and the mercy that he has for us. That's what makes Easter so very special. So thank you for being a part of this program today as we've been talking about Gethsemane and the intensity of the meaning for us and the great love that the Father has, that he would send his Son to suffer in such a way so that we might receive forgiveness. Don't ever think that forgiveness comes cheaply. It comes at a great price. Thanks for watching today. Thanks for being a part of Back to Bible Canada, and I wish you God's richest blessing. Thank you for watching today, and I want to ask you to make sure that you hit the like button and also subscribe to this channel so that you can receive any further notifications of all the videos that we prepare for you. Thank you so much for being a part of Back to the Bible Canada.